Dawn had scarcely broken over the Marshall family's homestead when the first black sedan slid up the driveway, its polished surface gleaming with a silent warning. David Marshall's parents, Ellen and Frank, sat at opposite ends of the breakfast table, their plates untouched, eyes hollow with dread, or with only a single flicker of a newspaper photograph. The mangled hood of David's car had told them what the coroner's report could not fully convey. Their son, their bright-eyed boy, was gone. Across the yard, in the shelter of ancient oaks, Max, David's German shepherd, broad-chested and steadfast, padded at the edge of the front stoop. His coat of sable fur was wet with dew and grief. His eyes, those amber beacons of devotion, flicked toward the house with a question no one yet dared to answer. Beneath his leather collar, the nameplate gleamed softly. Marshall. He had been David's guardian from puppyhood, protector through every scraped knee and shadowy fear. Now trembling with loss, Max refused to leave the threshold he had crossed 1,000 times at David's side. As the hearse drivers stepped from their vehicle, somber figures in sleek black coats, Frank rose with a stiffness that spoke of years of soldierly bearing. He did not look at his wife or the dog. Ellen, shoulders hunched, rose only when the drivers approached the front door. Max growled low, a deep echo of raw emotion that made every bone in Ellen's heart crack. She knelt before him, voice shaking. "It's him, isn't it? Gone?" Max's mournful whine answered her. As the black-clad pallbearers entered the foyer, Frank's hand closed on Ellen's trembling fingers. The photograph on the mantel, a smiling David flanked by Max on a sunlit trail, seemed to dim beneath the pall of grief that settled over the household. Morning light filtered through stained glass windows as neighbors and old friends filled the little church where David had first breathed life into the world. Outside, a brooding canopy of coal-gray clouds gathered on the horizon, as if the sky itself braced to share in the congregation's sorrow. The air inside the sanctuary was heavy with the mingled scents of polished oak pews, freshly cut lilies, and a faint undercurrent of strong coffee, an unexpected comfort against the palpable weight of grief settling into every corner. In the center aisle sat the polished mahogany casket, its lid gently propped open to reveal David's still form, dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy blazer that had once carried him into milestone celebrations. He would now never attend. Atop the casket lay a single wreath of pristine white roses, each bloom a quiet testament to innocence unspoiled. A soft silk ribbon curled around the wreath's base, its silver-lettered message reading, "David Marshall, beloved son, forever. In our hearts." At the head of the casket stood Max, David's loyal golden retriever, his front paws resting solemnly on the cool wood rim. Max's golden coat, now dulled by the dim light, framed his unwavering gaze, locked on the face of the boy who had laughed, played, and confided in him until the very end. Not once did Max's eyes drift. Not once did his stance falter. He was a living monument of steadfast devotion. Behind Max, Ellen and Frank, David's mother and father, occupied the two seats designated for the grieving parents. Frank sat rigid, his broad shoulders hunched as though bearing an invisible yoke. Each controlled breath seemed to tremor against the confines of his shirt collar, belying the fierce ache he kept pressed deep within his chest. Ellen, her auburn hair pulled back beneath a simple black veil, leaned forward in her seat. Her trembling hands clasped a lace-embroidered handkerchief, and tears slipped through her fingers in gentle rivulets, each droplet a whispered lament. Periodically, she reached out a tentative hand to stroke Max's fur, as though by comforting the dog she might bridge the yawning chasm left by her son's departure. Yet Max remained statuesque, his very stillness a vow that he would not abandon David now, when his presence was needed most. At the front of the nave, the pastor, a kindly man whose usual warm tenor quavered with emotion, approached the pulpit. His eyes were glassy, the rims red with unshed tears, and his hand trembled as he opened the well-worn Bible. He cleared his throat, then began to speak. His words wove through passages of scripture, promising eternal rest, divine consolation, and hope beyond the veil of this life. Yet in the hushed expanse of the sanctuary, each phrase felt fragile, as if the rich oak panels themselves might shatter under the weight of such loss. From his vantage, Max's ears pricked at every rustle of the congregation's shifting, each soft footstep or stifled sob setting him on alert. His body remained coiled in protective watchfulness, as though guarding his master's lifeless form from the unseen shadows that dared to approach. And though the pastor's voice drew to a close in a benediction meant to comfort, the silence that followed was a testament to the truth no sermon could soften. David Marshall was gone, and with him the bright laughter that once echoed through these walls. The world, for all its promises of renewal, would bear his absence forever. A shiver ran through the congregation as Max's bark echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling, sharp, insistent, and full of something more than grief. For a moment, the rain-drenched windows seemed to blur, and all eyes turned toward the dog standing resolute beside his friend's casket. Even the pastor, caught mid-prayer, paused with his book clasped to his chest. In that single resonant sound, Max distilled every ounce of steadfast devotion he had ever shown David. The midnight watches, the silent comforts, the warm press of his fur against a frightened boy. Ellen drew in a trembling breath and reached for Frank's hand, finding unspoken solace in the rough comfort of his fingers. Sophie, who had slipped in behind her parents, stepped forward and knelt beside Max, her small palm resting against his damp coat. Amy, too, rose quietly from the fifth pew, tucking her hymn book under her arm as she approached the head of the aisle. Each mourner felt something shift in the still air, a reminder that love, like loyalty, is never truly silenced by loss. The pastor gently laid aside his Bible and offered a new benediction. Not a litany of distant promises, but an invocation of the love they had all shared with David. "Let us go forth," he said, voice steadier now, carrying in our hearts the joy he brought us and the example of a friend who guarded him through every storm. As he spoke, the storm outside softened to a rhythmic patter, as though the heavens themselves had taken heed. Soft strains of "How Great Thou Art" rose from the hymnals, yet the echoes of Max's bark lingered most powerfully in the sanctuary. When the final notes faded, the congregation filed past the casket in reverent procession. Amy knelt beside Max one last time, brushing her fingers through his fur. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hushed with both sorrow and gratitude. And as she stood to leave, she carried with her the most profound truth of the day, that in the echo of a dog's loyalty, mourning was transformed into a celebration of love's enduring bond. The rain softened to a steady mist as the last shovel, Dowe's earth settled over the casket. Max remained poised at the grave's edge, his flank brushing lightly against Ellen's side, as if offering her both warmth and company. At length, Frank set the shovel aside and moved to kneel beside his wife, his arm encircling her shoulders in a quiet, shared ache. Amy stood close by, umbrella tilted so she could see the two of them, her heart aching with both sorrow and the fierce gratitude of having witnessed Max's steadfast guard. For a long moment, no one spoke but the whisper of rain through the pines, beyond the cemetery gates. Then the pastor offered a final benediction, his words carried in low tones, that love once given remains a beacon through every shadow, and loyalty once pledged stands undimmed by absence. As he spoke, Max lowered his head to Ellen's hand, allowing her gentle strokes to soothe his vigil-wearied spirit. At her touch, his rigid watch softened, and at last he rose, stepping back into the gathering of mourners. One by one, the family passed. Frank paused to press his palm to the cool stone marker. Amy laid a single white rose on top. Ellen brushed a tear from her cheek and whispered a final farewell. Max followed them, padding silently behind, his broad shoulders lifted with the dignity of a soldier come home at last. When they turned away from the grave, the mist parted just enough to reveal a shaft of pale sunlight breaking through the clouds, a quiet promise that even the darkest skies yield to light. Under that gentle light, Max took his place beside Ellen and Frank, leaning into them as they walked from the cemetery. In his solemn eyes lingered the echo of a bond that neither death nor distance could sever. And though David's laughter no longer filled the air, every footstep they took in his absence carried the weight and the wonder of a love that endures beyond the final breath. Max's bark sliced through the rain-drenched hush like flares in the dark. Ellen stiffened, Frank's shoulders snapped to attention, and Amy hastened forward, blanket slipping from her mother's trembling frame. Max circled the grave once, more, then planted a heavy paw against the lid, his claws clicking on polished oak. He reared up, front paws braced firmly, and unleashed a final urgent shriek. Frank scrambled toward the graveside, rain sluicing down his face. "What is it?" "Boy?" he called, but Max only barked again, stamping the ground. Helen joined him, bending to peer at the earth where the casket rested and froze. On the western side of the freshly turned mound, the sod was collapsing. A muddy rivulet, swollen by the day's downpour, had undermined the bank. The grave's edge crumbled in soft sliding clods, and the coffin began to tip, its lower corner slithering into the narrow fissure. Water pooled around the rim as the oak creaked under its own weight. "No!" Amy cried, darting forward, but Max intercepted her gently with a muzzle against her hand. His wide eyes urged caution rather than brute force. Frank dropped the shovel, wading into the muddy trench. "Hold him steady," he told Ellen, who clutched Max's collar as though anchoring him by sheer will. Together, they formed a human-dog barrier, bracing the casket with outstretched arms. But against the relentless, sodden earth, their strength would soon fail. At that moment, the cemetery caretaker, old Mr. Stevenson, came sprinting from the office, boots splashing through puddles. He carried a coil of rope and 2 heavy sandbags. Working with Frank, he threw the rope under the coffin and looped it around its base. Then, with Amy and Ellen's help, they hoisted the shifting end back onto solid ground. Stevenson flung the sandbags against the exposed earth, filling the gap and stemming the flow of muddy water. Throughout the rescue, Max remained unwavering at the head of the grave, ears flicking at every movement, tail a taut rudder of vigilance. When Frank finally gave the shout, "It's secure," Max sat back, his labored panting the only sound amid the dripping pines. Ellen sank to her knees, rain-soaked blanket pooling around her. Amy knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around both mother and dog. Frank laid a hand on Max's broad head, voice thick with gratitude. "You saved him again, boy." Max pressed his cold nose into Frank's palm, as if accepting the praise, and then, with a dignified shake of his coat, he lay down beside the grave once more. The storm eased to a gentle patter, and in the softened light that filtered through, parting clouds, the 4 figures formed a silent tableau of family bound by loyalty and love. In the wake of Max's alarm, David's final resting place stood firm, once more proof that true devotion not only honors the past, but can stave off even nature's fiercest threats. In that moment, as grief tightened its grip, a voice weak, ragged, answered Max's call from within. Ellen lunged forward. Frank rushed her aside with trembling force. Amy called for the cemetery caretaker. With shovels clattering, they pried open the casket. Beneath the lid lay David Marshall, pale, bruised, but breathing. An oxygen tube clung to his lips, a faint rise and fall of his chest, the deepest answer to Max's devotion. The wail of the E. Siren cut through the damp air as the ambulance doors clanged shut. Ellen squeezed David's hand so tightly, her knuckles went white. His fingers twitched in response. Frank climbed in beside them, pressing a kiss to Ellen's forehead, his shoulders still trembling with disbelief. Max barked once through the doorway, then sprang up, nose pressed to the glass as the paramedic gently strapped David in. "Hold on," the medic murmured, sliding the stretcher onto the gurney rails. "We'll take good care of him." Ellen's tears fell freely as the gurney slid into the back of the rig. Amy reached through the open doors, brushing her fingers across David's arm. "I'm right here," she whispered. David's lips curved in the faintest of smiles before his eyes drifted closed again. Outside, Max danced at the ambulance's side, barking encouragement as the doors sealed and the rig lurched forward. Only when it rounded the bend down the muddy lane did Max stop, tail still wagging, ears pricked in watchful vigil. At Winterbrook Hospital's emergency bay, bright lights and hurried voices swirled around them. Paramedics passed David from stretcher to hospital gurney. Nurses unhooked monitors and draped blankets over him. A doctor emerged, young, eyes calm but urgent. "He's stable," she announced. "We'll run scans, clear any internal issues, and keep him under observation." "Right. Now he needs rest and fluids." The fact that he responded so quickly is remarkable. Ellen leaned over, forehead against David's as monitors beeped in steady cadence. Frank placed a gentle hand on his son's chest, still marveling at the faint rise and fall of his ribs. Amy stood just behind them, her arms wrapped around Ellen's shoulders. Hours later, as the storm finally broke into a gentle drizzle outside the hospital windows, David stirred again. His eyelids fluttered, and he turned his head toward the voice he knew best. "Mom," he croaked. Ellen's sobs turned to laughter as she pressed her cheek to his. "Oh, sweetheart, you're safe. You're going to be all right." Nurses bustled in, but David's gaze found the door, and there on the linoleum floor just beyond visiting hours sat Max. The hospital had called ahead. The faithful dog had followed the ambulance all the way, and no one had had the heart to turn him away. His golden muzzle was wet with rain, but his eyes shone bright with triumph and relief. David's hand shot out. "Max," he whispered. Max's tail thumped so hard the floor trembled. At once, Ellen and Frank helped David to sit up, and the nurses stepped back with soft smiles. David reached down. Max leaned in, muzzle warm against his palm. In that moment, the beeping monitors and sterile walls faded away, replaced by the unbreakable bond between boy and dog. By evening's end, David was moved to a private room. Ellen tucked a blanket around him while Frank fetched water. Amy stroked Max's damp ears. The three of them, mother, father, and daughter, gathered around David's bedside as Max curled at the foot of the bed, ever vigilant. David cleared his throat. "I thank you," he said, voice still weak but stronger than before. He patted the space beside him. Max rose and nudged in, resting his head on David's mattress. Ellen brushed a strand of hair from David's forehead. "You saved each other," she murmured. David managed a small laugh, more like he saved me. And there, beneath the soft glare of the hospital lamp, the family leaned in close to humans, and one steadfast canine bound by love, by hope, and by the promise of new beginnings. A soft afternoon light filtered through the hospital blinds, painting stripes of gold across the pale green walls. David shifted in the bed, testing his strength with a slow inhale and exhale. Each breath felt more solid than the last. Max, ever faithful, lifted his head at the slight movement, dark eyes shining with concern and relief. He rose to his paws and padded to the bedside, resting his muzzle gently on David's wrist. Ellen, her cheeks still rimmed pink from tears of joy, slipped from the armchair and brushed a stray lock of hair behind David's ear. She offered him a small smile. "Feeling better, sweetheart?" David managed a nod, then flexed his fingers. "I think so." His gaze drifted to Max. "Hey, buddy," Max responded with a soft waffle, sweeping his tail against the floor. Amy, drawn by that familiar bond, moved to David's other side. She tucked the blanket just so and whispered, "We've missed you." Frank, standing at the foot of the bed with folded charts in hand, cleared his throat. "The doctors say you'll be out of here in 2 days if you keep this up." His stern face softened. "There's a world waiting for you." David let out a weak laugh. "I can't wait to get back to it." He closed his eyes momentarily, feeling the steady rise of his shoulder under Ellen's gentle touch. And to have Max back on the porch, not just in hospital. At that, Max broke into a quiet, excited pant, his first true dog smile in days, and nudged David's hand until he stroked the dog's soft fur. Amy knelt beside Max, brushing behind his ears with careful fingers. "He saved you," she said, voice thick. "You owe him big time." David turned his head with effort and pressed his fingertips into Max's coarse coat. "I know." He paused, eyes misting. "I'm going to work on my end of the deal." Ellen reached for David's good hand and gave it a squeeze. "One step at a time," she reminded him. Frank stepped forward, folding the charts. "How about we plan your homecoming?" he suggested. "We'll bring you home this weekend. Sophie's been making welcome back posters." David's eyes brightened. "And the cabin?" he teased. "I've got to see if that wall still holds secrets." Everyone laughed softly. Max lowered his head to rest beside David's pillow, content to be at the center of this circle of love. Outside, the rain had ceased altogether, leaving the world washed and bright. Inside, the hospital room hummed with quiet anticipation. A family on the mend, a brave boy reclaiming his life, and the dog whose steadfast heart had guided them all. Home. There in that sterile room scented with antiseptic and flowers, life triumphed over death, brought back by a dog's unyielding loyalty and an unspoken vow that he would guard his friend until the final breath. Golden rays of summer sunlight slanted through the hospital's gauzy curtains, pooling on the polished stone floor like warm honey. David took his first tentative steps along the garden's cobblestone path, each pace a triumph born of weeks of healing. His calf muscles trembled under the late morning warmth, but Max, ever vigilant, walked beside him, his stride matching David's unsteady rhythm. Outside, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses. The manicured hedges bowed under clusters of white hydrangeas, and dragonflies darted among the flower beds. Birds trilled their midday songs from the treetops, a natural fanfare celebrating David's return to health. Ellen and Frank trailed just behind, their eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. Ellen's hand hovered near David's shoulder, ready to steady him at the slightest wobble. Frank's broad shoulders relaxed into a rare smile that creased the corners of his stern face. Every careful footfall echoed their relief that their son was truly coming home. Amy jogged alongside, phone in hand. She paused to snap a photograph as David and Max passed beneath an arch of climbing roses. In the captured frame, David's eyes shone with determination and love, while Max's golden coat shimmered in the sun. Amy's laughter tripped lightly through the air as she recorded the moment for posterity. At a vibrant rosebush dripping with coral blooms, Max halted. His nose twitched as he inhaled the heady perfume, and he pressed a single paw against the soft earth, as though reaffirming that the world he had saved still teemed with color and promise. David slowed until he reached Max's side, then gently bent to wrap his arm around the dog's strong neck. His fingertips brushed over Max's warm fur, whispering a touch of comfort that mirrored the dog's unfailing courage. "You never gave up," David murmured, voice husky with emotion. Max responded by lifting his muzzle and planting a gentle lick against David's cheek, an echo of the countless times he had steadied his friend in darkness. Ellen stepped forward, sweeping an arm around both of them. Frank closed the small circle, and together they began the short journey back to the car. Sophie's laughter trailed behind them as she gathered her brothers and sister, none of whom could wait to see David stride through the cabin door once more. Under the canopy of summers, Promise the little family moved in unison. David, whose heart had nearly stilled, Max, the steadfast guardian, Ellen and Frank, whose love had never wavered, and Amy, whose jubilant snapshots would keep this day alive forever. As they disappeared down the garden path, the rose petals fluttered in their wake, a silent benediction for a family made whole again. In every wag of Max's tail and every step David took, the promise endured. Loyalty knows no bounds, love outlasts the darkest night, and sometimes the greatest miracles arrive on four paws. If this story of devotion and hope touched your heart, please subscribe for more unforgettable tales of animal courage and human kindness.